A new generation is discovering these mid-century modern homes of the 1950s, and the man who designed them never would have expected an architectural tour like this.
We were making homes for people that couldn't afford a big house.
When you live on a great river, you're part of an exclusive global great river community. But only recently has the Mississippi had a place at that table.
Not that the Mississippi River wasn't invited, just nobody went.
And Valmeyer, Illinois, then in 1993, and now. It's all next on Living St. Louis. I'm Jim Kircher, and this quiet neighborhood in Crestwood has been getting a lot of attention lately as a well-preserved showcase of mid-century modern architecture. It's probably not what the first owners or even the architect who's still with us were expecting when the area was developed in the 1950s. Yes, they were stylish, but they were really built to be affordable. Last fall, this street was just lined with cars and visitors showing up to buy tickets to tour the Ridgewood homes.
All right, so this is the brochure here. Gives you
The event was put on by Modern STL.
On this page here is the map locating each of the houses in the neighborhood.
The organization is dedicated to promoting and preserving St. Louis's modern architecture. And when it comes to mid-century modern homes, Ridgewood is like stepping back in time. The houses here were built in the 1950s, and they're still here. They haven't been torn down. No McMansions in sight. And this style has fans of all ages.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they still seem pretty modern, that whole open concept. I just feel like it started now in this time period. And they feel so cozy.
We grew up watching the Brady Bunch, and this is what we grew up watching. You know, this type of architecture, we always loved it. And when we saw that this was going to be a house tour, we thought, this is our opportunity to see something like this inside. So
the tour started at Todd Heilman's house, the rare split level in this neighborhood. He was in the market for just such a house when this one became available a few years ago.
Now, the mid-century moderns are just, use so many good design principles. I love this house. I love everything about it.
You don't mind sharing it with people?
No. Come one, come all.
No one is more pleased or even surprised by all of this than the man who designed these homes very early in his career. Ralph Fournier is turning 97 years old this year. The street was lined with cars, people walking up and down, going in and out of these houses. Did you imagine that would happen when you were working on these developments?
Never, yeah. It has changed so much now. Everybody thinks a lot of them.
Fournier designed hundreds of homes in this style. These were in partnership with developer Burton Denke. This was post-war America, lots of young couples looking for places to live and raise their baby boomer children. They wanted a house and a house they could afford, and Denke and Fournier set out to meet the demand.
We were making homes for people that couldn't afford a big house. That was our starter. It was sort of a starter house.
And what went into that? So if you're making a starter house that's affordable, how did you and Burton Denke get around to making it affordable to those folks?
Well, it was basic. It had three bedrooms, a living room, a dining room, and then a bath, kitchen, and a little utility room. And there was no attic space. And no basement.
One way to keep the cost down was to use prefabricated pieces that were shipped in. The trick was in how they were put together. But you're working with the same pieces. As I walk through and see that
it's the same thing, but it's turned around or flipped, and it was easy to work with because we had panels that were 2'4", 4'4", 6'4". So if you wanted to make a bigger building, you could just add either one of those panels.
Construction techniques saved money, too. They put in a perimeter foundation, put up columns and beams, put on a roof, and installed the wall panels.
Then they'd pour the concrete floor. They wouldn't do that until they had the whole thing enclosed, so the weather was no problem.
There were other big suburban, mass-produced post-war developments in St. Louis. Homes in St. Anne were also built fast and made affordable. The real estate ads in 1953 priced these at around $11,500, a couple of $1,000s cheaper than Ridgewood prices. But these did not have a look that said modern. These did, and one of them was featured as a 5-star home in Better Homes and Gardens, which called it an achievement in small house planning, a fact that was featured prominently in ads in the real estate section. In one ad, Ridgewood homes were called contemporary, yet ahead of the times. So today we call it mid-century modern. What were you guys calling it?
The style, I think the style was kind of California.
The features included the shallow, sloping roof, high ceilings, large windows, and while you could get an enclosed garage, most of the homes came with a very non-Midwestern carport. So what brings you guys here?
Because we lived here. We lived here. I lived here for 30 years.
You weren't thinking you were living in classic homes?
Yeah,
we knew we were living in homes that were a little bit unusual.
Yeah, they were different.
But nothing that would ever be of note, really. I never thought about it historically.
All right. Styles, of course, they come and they go. What's modern in one generation becomes old-fashioned in the next, possibly rejected, even torn down. And then another generation comes along. So what brings you here?
Interest in mid-century modern houses. I'm a member of Modern STL, just joined this summer because my husband and I bought a mid-century modern house.
Were you looking for mid-century modern?
Well, we've always liked it, and we just stumbled on a house we fell in love with. We didn't think it'd be possible for us to have one, and we were really excited to get one.
You've lived long enough now to see these being viewed by a new generation with a new appreciation for it. That must make you feel pretty good.
Oh, and enjoying it. They all think they're still pretty good.
Ralph Fournier seems to take all of this in stride. He retired from architecture 30 years ago, and he did design some showcase homes for wealthy clients. But it was these kinds of 1950s mid-century starter homes that now have people proudly saying,
Well, it's Ralph Fournier.
every year, cities and towns on rivers have to worry about the possibility of flooding or deal with the reality of flooding. It's a fact of life for river communities. They have to plan for it, they have to know what they can do, they have to know what they can't do, and they have to be thinking about what they might do differently in the future. Because being a river city is not just about the romantic past, it's about the economy, the environment, the people now and in the coming years. In some cases, for some towns, it's about survival. A group of about 20 Mississippi River mayors was in Washington, D.C. in early March for meetings at the White House with members of Congress and with the Army Corps of Engineers, pushing for a nearly $8 billion infrastructure bill that would protect one of this country's most important economic assets, the Mississippi River Corridor. Those mayors are among the 88 mayors from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico who belong to an organization that was started 7 years ago. It's run out of an office in downtown St. Louis. Colin Wellenkamp is the executive director of the Mississippi River Cities and Towns Initiative. So you've got twin cities, right? So you've got in New Orleans, St. Louis, Memphis. You've got the medium-sized cities like Quad Cities.
Dubuque,
sure.
Alton, Quincy, Cape Girardeau.
When you're dealing with such a huge region, big cities, small cities, northern, midwestern, southern, you get a lot of different political views. Do the divisions that we see played out publicly, are those less intense when the mayors get together to talk about the issues they're facing?
It is. We tend to not get bogged down in the partisanship that can happen on the national level with a lot of these issues.
How is the climate change discussion going on within these Mississippi River cities?
Mayors may talk about climate risk differently back home, depending on where they are along the corridor. But when it comes down to it, we know that we are a significant climate risk region. We've sustained $200 billion in disaster impacts since 2005 in the Mississippi River corridor. That is a significant cost, and that is just actual losses, not the ancillary costs or the ripple effects that come with those losses. So, record floods, record droughts, record storm events.
And that's happening no matter what you think about policy or cause.
Call it what you want. You know, if you don't want to call it climate change, fine. The point our mayors make is this is happening, and we are being impacted by it. We need to address it. And a lot of our solutions that we are very excited about are natural ones, because habitat and natural infrastructure like wetlands and marshes and forests can handle these problems and these issues a lot more cheaply and have ancillary benefits like cleaning your water than brick and mortar infrastructure can.
Is this what people were feeling 6 or 7 years ago, or has that evolved? Has there been a greater acceptance of the need to do things and maybe the way to do things?
It's been an evolution. Yeah, it has evolved over time. I think as these disaster impacts come hot and heavy again and again, they're very persistent, they're getting worse. The time between them is lessening. That these perceptions have grown with those impacts. We really don't get bogged down much in the politics. In fact, our association is fiercely bipartisan. And I would say that the Mississippi River runs purple in terms of political orientation. We have a mix of everything. You know, from Minnesota down to Louisiana, you go through some significant political cross currents, to use lots of water puns. But at a practical level, all of those currents are calm because we've got to get to solutions. Because the mayor has to go home, meet with the folks in the grocery store, see them at the gas station, everywhere in their town. And they've got to be able to have an answer for them. And the answer can't be, this party's doing that, this party's doing this. People just want to know, what's the solution? What are we going to do to solve the problem?
Can you give me a sense of the top priorities or the top issues that the communities up and down the river are facing or promoting?
Sure. So when you're elected to be mayor, right, the folks that elect you really are looking for you to expand the tax base, preserve and add jobs, grow the economy, and don't do those things by compromising the things that people care about, right? Clean water, clean air, green space. And when you look at the economy of the Mississippi River, it's huge. There are 8 separate economic sectors operating off the river that need the river to operate. The 3 biggest in order are manufacturing, tourism, and agriculture. So they're interested in the infrastructure and the jobs and the economic components that feed into each of those economies. The agricultural piece is huge and growing. The whole global commodity supply chain is a very big player for the Mississippi River. In fact, from what we've seen, the Mississippi River is the biggest water basin player in the world when it comes to the global commodity supply chain.
So we're talking corn and beans in the region. A lot of that stuff goes to the river.
It does. Not only is it irrigated off the river to grow it, it's put on the river to move it to market.
There's trade issues, tariff issues, markets being closed or reduced or shut down. This is something these mayors care about?
A lot. Yeah, it's a big issue for us.
I think the first time I heard you speak, you gave this a context that I think me and a lot of other people never thought about. This is one of the great rivers of the world. We know that. We know it's the Mississippi, but of course we take it for granted, but we're here. But you put it in with the Rhine and the Danube and the Volga and the Yangtze and the Amazon and the Nile. We're up there.
We discovered shortly after this association formed that there was a robust international river community that had been talking, meeting, coming up with solutions for years. We just hadn't been at the table. Not that the Mississippi River wasn't invited, just nobody went. So our mayors really wanted to change that. Turns out the Mississippi River is the number one commodity producing river basin on Earth. Number two is the Yangtze, and then the ones that you mentioned are the other major food-producing river basins. They've been talking. They've been coordinating. We just haven't been part of that conversation until now. Now we are, and now we're a valued member of that robust community.
I would think we'd have a lot to offer as well as a lot to learn.
A lot to learn. We've learned a lot from Mexico. Mexico really does a lot with very little water. The Rhine and the Danube, a lot of these rivers in the world go through multiple countries. The Mississippi River, we're fortunate. We have the whole thing right here at home. But 10 nations, 15, 20 nations may comprise a river basin in other parts of the world. The Rhine-Danube river basins have been very advanced in their approach to flood mitigation, resiliency, and sustainability. We have learned a ton just in a short time of exposure in the things that they have been able to do. And a lot of their solution platform is natural infrastructure, is natural assets that they let nature take off a lot of the cost and the maintenance and the operation of the water regulatory services that they need. Rivers are the most used source of fresh water on Earth because they flow through communities, right? Everybody gets a straw. But they only comprise 0.006% of the freshwater supply on the planet. So it is absolutely vital that these rivers are sustained, or we will see a significant collapse in the world's ability to move, produce, manage, deliver commodities to everybody. We happen to be number one in that space. So the voice of the Mississippi River corridor is absolutely essential.
The worst flood in memory, of course, was the flood of '93. It was all over the Midwest. Billions of dollars in damages, a lot of suffering, a lot of losses. Some people had to move, and in the case of Valmeyer, Illinois, the whole town had to move. Last summer, Ruth Ezell visited Valmeyer 25 years after the Great Flood.
Here in Valmeyer, Illinois, there's an entire generation of residents for whom this is the only Valmeyer that's ever existed. But for those who lived through the flood, it's been quite a journey from devastation to rebirth.
Soon we'll see some more activity here.
Few people recall the history of what happened to old Valmeyer, like village administrator Dennis Knoblich. He was in his second term as Valmeyer's mayor when he issued a mandatory evacuation ahead of the first floodwaters that arrived Monday morning, August 2nd, 1993.
We had anywhere from, if you lived on the good side of town, on the east side of town, few houses stayed completely dry. But then the water levels increased, maybe a foot or two of water there, up to 16 feet on the west side of town. It wasn't as much the depth of the water as it was the current. So we had strong current, we had floating debris, trees, small buildings, tractor tires, anything that the water could pick up and float along. That was all coming through and smashing into the houses and causing damage and things like that. So we knew with the amount of damage that we had to the number of properties that were damaged, and with the attitude of the people, we knew that a lot of folks would be going different directions, and there probably wouldn't be a town anymore.
In just a few months, Mayor Knobloch had a preliminary plan and secured a new location for the village 400 feet higher on nearby farmland. With funding from the state and federal governments, the community broke ground in December of '93 for the new Valmeyer. The federal government bought out the owners of about 325 flood-ravaged homes, then turned the land over to the village of Valmeyer, which was responsible for demolition. Rather than rebuild homes on this land, the village is leasing it to area farmers. They, in turn, are growing soybeans on it. Another, more creative example of repurposing can be found on higher ground. Rock City is an underground commercial development in an abandoned limestone quarry. The quarry's caves, with their naturally cool temperatures, are ideal for warehousing and distribution and refrigerated storage. Valmeyer acquired the quarry as part of its purchase of farmland for the new village. It's leasing the property to the developer. As Valmeyer rebuilds its business space, it initially lost about 30. The village is also rebuilding population. Its 1993 total of 900 residents dropped more than 20%. A quarter century later, that figure is up to nearly 1,300.
We had our high school baseball team here that picked up second place in state, which is phenomenal for a town this size. And, had we not gone through the effort to rebuild and relocate the town and keep it together, we wouldn't be experiencing things like that now and having things like that for the next generation to enjoy.
Something that wasn't talked about much in 1993 was climate change. But today it's considered a factor in the frequency and intensity of storms and droughts and rising sea levels. It might seem that something that affects the entire planet is just too big to deal with, requiring solutions on a scale that just can't be achieved. But that makes me think of a guy I met last year at St. Louis University's Climate Summit. His name is Molina, not the guy with all the gold gloves, the guy with the Nobel Prize. At the Climate Summit, Mexican chemist Mario Molina was presented with a Cardinals jersey with his name on the back, and he seemed to take it in good humor. But his work these days on climate change is serious business, and he is somebody worth paying attention to. When I got a chance to talk to him, I couldn't help but notice the lapel pin, which can be worn only by someone who has a Nobel Prize. You will also see Mario Molina in the PBS documentary entitled The Ozone Hole: How We Saved the Planet. It's about a global environmental crisis and a global response that worked. And Molina was a key figure. He received the Nobel Prize for helping discover that CFCs, which were widely used in aerosol sprays and coolants, were destroying the atmosphere's protective ozone layer. And if you're looking for encouragement that good science followed by good policy can make a difference, consider that the ozone hole over Antarctica that we were so worried about a few decades ago is slowly closing up.
And to me, that's optimism. I use that as an example that it's possible to solve global environmental problems. It's a huge challenge because you have to have practically all the countries in the planet agreeing to do something. And that happened already. It can be done. It has been done already once.
Were people doubtful when you first began to expose what was happening? Did they say, gosh, this is too big, we can't do anything about it?
Yes. In fact, the first reactions were the opposite. This is too small, we shouldn't worry about it.
Like CO2. Some people say that about CO2.
That's right. So you have all sorts of responses. But then eventually it became clear that we all had to work together. In contrast with climate change, we were lucky in the sense that it was only a few very large industries that were manufacturing these chemicals, and we were able eventually to work with them. Of course, initially they thought, well, we won't stop production just because there's some scientific theory, but they became part of it, and when the evidence became clear, they of course agreed to change. But that was not enough. Of course, it was diplomacy and working with many different countries. Eventually, it all worked, and
it hasn't just stopped; it's being reversed.
That's right. That's right.
You had said not only that you shared, obviously, your findings with the scientific community, but you felt it necessary to share it with the news media and with policymakers. Was that a big step for you, or is that something that came naturally?
No, it was actually a big step because the normal thinking of scientists that long ago was that they should only do science. They should let other groups worry about political issues and so on. But it was clear for Sherry Rowland, my colleague, and myself that there was nobody else that would take care of this problem, or not at least fast enough. So we convinced ourselves that it was our responsibility to really communicate this not just to other scientists but to society as well. Things have changed now because there are environmental organizations and there are groups that do these sort of things. What hasn't changed, though, is that it's still very important for the scientific community to participate actively and to make sure that science doesn't tell us what to do, but science tells us what happens depending on what society does. And so it's very important for science to keep its place and for the scientific community to be involved. It's very important to communicate everything that we're talking about here to society. And we recognize the scientific community has done a very poor job in communicating with people in general.
And that's Living St. Louis. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Kircher, and we'll see you next time.
Living St. Louis is made possible by the support of the Mary Rankin Jordan and Eddie A. Jordan Charitable Foundation and by the members of 9 Network.
Local programming on the 9 Network is generously supported by the Betsy Hosh Patterson and Thomas O. Patterson Foundation, committed to upholding quality, informative, and entertaining programming in our region.